Sign it. The voice was soft, yet as cold as a blade, piercing straight into my just-awakened mind. I blinked. In front of me was a black marble desk, with a document spread out on it, black text on white paper, marital property separation agreement. Across from me sat a woman. She wore a black silk blouse, her hair tied up in a low bun, revealing a stretch of pale, glowing neck. Her features were as delicate as a magazine cover, but there was not a trace of warmth in her eyes. The way she looked at me was like I was nothing more than an inconvenient stone. Bryn, my newlywed wife. No. Wasn't I supposed to be dead in the office? Memories come flooding back like a tidal wave. 3 consecutive months of overtime, sleeping only 4 hours a day, burning myself out for that damn project. At the last meeting, I stood up, everything went black, and then I knew nothing more. When I opened my eyes again, I was sitting here. 25 years old. The first day of a business marriage with the heiress of a city's top noble family, the Sterlings. In my past life, to prove I wasn't marrying above my station and to make her look at me with respect, I threw myself headfirst into the business world, working myself to the bone. 10 years, and I went from a poor nobody to a business tycoon who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Bryn. Then I died. Died at 2 a.m. in the office, still clutching a half-finished cup of instant coffee. Looking back now, it's ridiculous. I never even held her hand. Since fate has given me another chance at life, why would I keep grinding? I'm lying flat. I have to lie flat. Bryn's voice pulled me back to reality. Read the terms clearly. We'll live separately after marriage, no interference. I'll give you a supplementary card with a monthly allowance of $200,000 as living expenses. You can use the cars and rooms in this villa. The only requirement, don't cause trouble outside, and don't even think about getting your hands on any shares of the Sterling Group. $200,000. A villa. Luxury cars. No need to work. What kind of heavenly life is this? No problem. I picked up the pen and signed my name, Kyson, with a flourish. After signing, I slid the agreement back and flashed an incredibly sincere smile. Honey, happy cooperation. Bryn looked at me, her brow slightly furrowed. A flicker of surprise passed through her eyes, along with wariness. In my past life, seeing this agreement had made me feel deeply humiliated. I had argued with her on the spot and stormed out, slamming the door behind me. Now, can dignity be eaten? Nothing much, I'm going to sleep first. I'm dead tired. I yawned, got up, and walked away. At the door, I glanced back. She was staring at my back, clutching that agreement in her hand, her knuckles slightly white. I didn't care. I picked the largest guest room and flopped into the covers. In this life, I'm just a slacker. No one's going to make me work hard. What I didn't know was that downstairs in the study, Bryn had made a phone call. Look into someone for me. Kyson. Yes, the one I got the marriage certificate with today. I want all the information about him, from childhood to now. After hanging up, she walked to the window, gazing at the pitch-black night, murmuring to herself. Kyson, in this life, I won't let you succeed. I woke up naturally. Sunlight streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spreading warmly across the bed. I stretched, and my bones cracked in a series of pops. How long had it been since I'd slept so soundly? In my past life, for 10 years, I woke up at 5:30 every morning and went to bed at 1 a.m., even dreaming about plans. Now, screw the plans. I went downstairs in my slippers, and a maid in an apron was busy in the kitchen. Good morning, Elma, I greeted with a smile. Elma was the maid at Bryn's house, responsible for taking care of Bryn's daily needs. She saw me, paused for a moment, then smiled back and replied, Good morning, sir. Breakfast is ready. Would you like to eat now? Eat. The dining table was laden with all kinds of breakfast. I sat down and started eating, wolfing it down like a whirlwind. Halfway through my meal, footsteps came from upstairs. Bryn came down. She had changed into a white suit, with light makeup, still wearing that aloof expression. Seeing me eating breakfast, she paused for a moment. "Morning," she said flatly, sitting down across from me. "Good morning, honey." I mumbled indistinctly, my mouth stuffed with a steamed bun. She ignored me, picked up her milk, and took small sips, her posture as elegant as if she were filming a commercial. "By the way, honey," I wiped my mouth, "when are you going to give me that supplementary card with a 200,000 limit?" The spoon in her hand froze midair. She lifted her eyes, those beautiful orbs staring at me as if trying to see right through me. "I just want to buy a few things." I smiled with a simple, honest look. In my past life, I would rather die than spend her money, thinking it was like living off a woman. Now, all I want to say is, living off a woman is pretty great. Bryn was silent for a few seconds, then took a black card out of her bag and slid it across the table. "The pin is your birthday. Remember the agreement, don't cause any trouble." Don't worry. I grabbed the card and stuffed it into my pocket. She no longer looked at me and continued eating breakfast. But I could feel her temperature drop a few more degrees. After breakfast, she picked up her bag and got ready to leave. I followed her to the door and dutifully placed her high heels in front of her. "Take care, dear. Safe travels." She paused in the middle of putting on her shoes, looked up at me with a complicated expression. I didn't think much of it, waved at her, and smiled like an idiot. Once her car disappeared from sight, I immediately closed the door and spun around excitedly in the living room. Free at last. I dashed into the garage, picked the flashiest blue Porsche, and sped off with a roar. Shopping malls. Restaurants. Movie theaters. I'm going to make up for everything I missed out on in the past 10 years. By the end of the day, I had spent nearly 200,000. I changed into brand-name clothes from head to toe, ate the most expensive Japanese cuisine, watched an IMAX movie, and even had an essential oil SPA. In the evening, I drove home, the evening breeze blowing, feeling completely satisfied. As I stopped at a red light at an intersection, a black Maybach slowly pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, revealing a familiar face. Bryn. She was staring straight at me, and at the pile of shopping bags in my passenger seat. My heart skipped a beat. "I'm done for." I gave her an awkward smile. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes were as cold as an ice cellar. The light turned green, and I hit the gas, darting off faster than a rabbit. When I got home, I was moving things into my room when I heard the sound of high heels behind me. Bryn stood in the hallway, phone in hand, the screen showing a string of spending alerts. One day, 200,000. Her voice betrayed no emotion. "You don't seem to feel a thing." "Hee, first time getting a card, I'm excited." I scratched my head. "Kyson." She called my name, her tone suddenly turning serious. "What exactly are you trying to do?" "I'm not trying to do anything, just spending money and enjoying life." She let out a cold laugh. "Enjoying life? Do you think I believe that? You're pretending like this to let my guard down, so you can take everything from me, just like in the past life." "Past life?" My mind buzzed. Did she just say, past life? You. I looked at her eyes, filled with hatred, and a ridiculous thought emerged. Was she also reborn? No. That didn't fit. If she were reborn, she would know how desperately I fought in my past life, only to exhaust myself to death. Why would she say I was trying to take everything from her? Unless, she wasn't reborn. She was a time traveler. From another parallel universe. In that universe, I was an outright villain. She mistook me for that me. She thought my current laid-back attitude was all a facade. I looked into her eyes, opening my mouth to explain. But what could I say? I'm not the Kyson you know, I'm from another world. She'd only think I was making up an even more absurd lie. I wanted to cry but had no tears. God, are you messing with me? Over the next few days, I fully committed to the slacker persona. I slept until noon every day, played video games, watched movies, and played with the orange cat Elma had adopted. Every day, I maxed out the card Bryn had given me, spending nearly up to the limit. I bought all sorts of things: gaming consoles, drones, fishing rods, telescopes. The storage room quickly turned into a warehouse. The look in Elma's eyes shifted from initial surprise to helpless resignation. The way Bryn looks at me grows colder by the day. I know she must be sneering inwardly, keep pretending, go ahead. But the colder she gets, the calmer I become. Because I remember something. In my past life, less than a month after we got married, Bryn's uncle Kenneth, the vice president of Sterling Group, colluded with outsiders to short the company's stock, causing the share price to plummet. Bryn's grandfather was so furious he ended up in the hospital. Back then, I understood nothing and could only watch helplessly as Bryn shouldered all the pressure alone. This time, if history repeats itself, I can prepare in advance. On the surface, I'm just eating, drinking, and having fun, but in reality, I've been quietly monitoring Sterling Group's movements. I used my allowance to register a shell investment company and got in touch with a hacker friend I knew from my past life. Keep an eye on Kenneth for me, especially his dealings with Dingshin Capital. I said to him on the encrypted software. Dingshin Capital was the mastermind behind the short selling of the Sterling Group in collaboration with Kenneth in my past life. Buddy, are you trying to stir up trouble? My friend sent a cheeky grin emoji. Don't ask. If you ask, it's for maintaining world peace. At the same time, I also, casually, dropped hints to Bryn. For example, during meals, I would pretend to read financial news and mutter to myself, Dingshin Capital has been quite active lately, snapping up equity everywhere like locusts. Bryn's hand would pause for a moment, but she said nothing. Another time, when she was working overtime at home, I brought her a glass of milk and accidentally glanced at her documents. Honey, is your company currently raising funds? I heard that Dingshin Capital is very interested in the tech sector, and their methods aren't exactly clean. She would immediately close the file and stare at me coldly. Who told you to look at that? I immediately raised my hands in surrender. Didn't look, just hearsay. Then I made a quick escape. I knew she wouldn't believe a single word. She would only think I was spying for information. But that's fine. All I wanted was to hammer the words, Dingshin Capital, into her mind. That evening, after spending the last cent in my card, I was ready to go to bed, fully satisfied. My phone buzzed. My hacker friend, bro, something's up. Kenneth's overseas account just received a transfer of 50 million, and the source is an offshore shell company of Dingshin Capital. I sat up abruptly in bed. Here it comes. Keep watching. Also, help me check the release date of Sterling Group's financial report for next month. After hanging up the phone, I couldn't fall asleep no matter what. The wheels of history had indeed rolled over us. Early the next morning, Elma knocked on my door in a panic. Sir, something terrible. Old Mr. Edwin had a sudden heart attack and was taken to the hospital. I hurried downstairs. Bryn was already dressed, her face pale and her eyes slightly red. When she saw me, she only said, "Stay home. Don't go anywhere." Then she left without looking back. I knew she was afraid I would go to the company and cause trouble. Watching her retreating figure, I let out a sigh. This foolish woman. I didn't listen to her. I changed into something low-key and took a cab straight to Sterling Group. The office was in a state of panic. News of Bryn's grandfather being critically ill had somehow leaked, and the stock price began to plummet. Instead of heading to the top-floor executive office, I went straight to the fire escape across from the finance department. Before long, a middle-aged man hurried out, looking flustered. He wore gold-rimmed glasses and a custom-tailored suit, appearing refined and gentle, but his eyes were shifty. It was Kenneth. He was on the phone as he walked, speaking in a very low voice. Yes, the news has been released. The stock price won't hold for long. Once it hits rock bottom, you guys come in and scoop up the shares. Don't worry, I've already swapped out the financing plan, they won't be able to trace it. I listened, sneering inwardly. Replace the financing plan? This is meant to completely sever Sterling Group's capital chain. I followed him all the way to the underground parking lot. He got into the car, and just as he started the engine, I pulled open the door and sat inside. "Uncle Kenneth, in such a hurry, where are you off to?" Kenneth was startled. When he saw it was me, his expression instantly changed. "Kyson? What are you doing here?" I smiled. "Why wouldn't I be here? I'm here to discuss a business deal with you." "What business?" I took out my phone and played a recording. It was exactly the content of the phone call he had just made. Kenneth's face turned pale instantly. You're following me. Relax." I patted him on the shoulder. "I told you, it's a business deal. Whatever Dingshin Capital gave you, I want half. Then, you go turn yourself in to Bryn and say you were misled, that you made a momentary lapse in judgment. That way, you'll only be an accomplice and won't get many years. Otherwise." I shook my phone. "This recording, along with the transfer records, how many years do you think this will get you?" Kenneth's face was as pale as paper. He stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't figure out how this useless live-in son-in-law, in everyone's eyes, knew all of this. Who the hell are you?" "Me?" I laughed. "I'm just a freeloader. But if anyone messes with my meal ticket, I won't stand for it." Half an hour later, Bryn received a call from the legal department. Kenneth turned himself in. He admitted to leaking company secrets and colluding with Dingshin Capital to short the stock price. Bryn was stunned. Before she could even make a move, the mole had come forward on his own. "Why?" he said. It was Kyson who persuaded him to come. "Kyson?" Bryn's pupils contracted sharply. She pulled up the surveillance footage. In the video, Kyson appeared at the company, walked toward the finance department, and then followed Kenneth into the underground garage. She stared at the familiar figure on the screen, her gaze growing incredibly complex. She had thought he was just a waste who only knew how to spend money, a ticking time bomb lurking by her side. But when she needed help the most, it was him, quietly, without a sound, who pulled out that thorn for her. Who exactly is he? Kenneth's confession exploded like a bomb within the Sterling Group, causing an uproar. But to the outside world, it was a perfect opportunity to strike back. Bryn immediately held a press conference. She released evidence of Kenneth colluding with Dingshin Capital and announced that she would sue Dingshin for unfair competition. At the same time, Bryn's grandfather's condition stabilized, and the Sterling Group secured new bank credit lines. As soon as the news broke, the stock price rebounded instantly, even higher than before the crisis. Those speculators who had followed the short-selling trend lost everything. Dingshin Capital's stock price plummeted due to the scandal, suffering a severe blow. Everyone praised Bryn for staying calm in the crisis and acting with decisive force. Only Bryn herself knew that this turnaround came from the person she despised the most. In the evening, she returned home. A floor lamp was on in the living room. Kyson was curled up asleep on the sofa, covered with a blanket, with the TV still on. Several dishes were set on the dining table, sealed with plastic wrap, and beside them was a note. "Elma made these, saved some for you. Elma came over and said, the gentleman waited for you until very late. He wouldn't let me turn off the light, saying he was afraid you'd come back in the dark." Bryn's heart was gently touched. She walked over to the sofa, crouched down, and looked at his sleeping face. Without his daytime playful grin, he slept with his brows slightly furrowed and his eyelashes long. Was this still the man she remembered, so sinister and cunning? She reached out her hand, wanting to touch his face, but her fingertips stopped a centimeter away from him. She was afraid. Afraid that all of this was just another, even cleverer scheme. At that moment, the person on the sofa stirred, opening his eyes groggily. "Honey. You're back." I rubbed my eyes and sat up. "Have you eaten?" "Yeah." "That's good." I yawned. "I'm heading up to bed. I'm exhausted." I walked upstairs, never once mentioning anything about the company from start to finish. It was as if I were just an ordinary husband waiting at home for his wife to return. "Stop right there." Bryn's voice rang out from behind me. I turned around. "Was it you who did what happened today, I paused for a moment, then scratched my head with a smile. What happened? I've been playing games at home all day. Still pretending. A wave of indescribable emotion surged in Bryn's heart. Kyson, I've watched the surveillance footage. I was silent for a few seconds, then let out a sigh. Fine, it was me. But don't overthink it. Then how do you want me to think about it? I leaned against the stair railing, looking completely sincere. It's just that, if the company goes under, you lose your money, and I lose my allowance. I can't afford to lose my allowance, I haven't finished my game yet. Bryn, that's the reason. I spread my hands. What else? I'm just protecting my long-term meal ticket. She stared at me, unsure whether to be angry or amused. The reason was utterly absurd. But looking at my earnest face, she felt that this might actually be my true feelings. For the first time, she felt that the meticulously constructed worldview of the villain Kyson had developed a crack. From that day on, Bryn's attitude toward me changed. She no longer looked at me as if I were a class enemy. Though her face remained cold, it seemed as if something beneath that layer of ice was melting. For instance, she would take the initiative to ask me, "How much did you spend today?" I bought a massage chair and an automatic feeder for the cat. She paused for a moment, then said, "The storage room on the 3rd floor is empty, you can use it." That was her private storage room. Another example, the dishes on the dining table began to change. I like spicy food, though it used to be all mild dishes, now there's an extra spicy dish every day. Elma said it was her own idea to change her taste, but I could tell with my little finger who put her up to it. The most absurd thing was, one night I was gaming until late, got hungry, and went downstairs to find something to eat. I opened the fridge, and Bryn was standing behind me in her silk pajamas. "What do you want to eat?" "I'll make it for you." I was so startled I almost tore the fridge door off. No need. I'll just have instant noodles. Having a billionaire female CEO cook me a midnight snack. I'm afraid it would shorten my life. I made a bowl of noodles and crouched in a corner of the kitchen to eat, while she leaned against the doorframe watching me. It made my skin crawl. Not sleeping. Can't sleep. Then, want to watch a movie. Don't feel like it. Overwhelming pressure. Ever since that allowance incident, she's been acting strange. She no longer guards against me, but that probing look in her eyes has only grown stronger. It's as if she sees me as some rare creature, wanting to dissect and study me from the inside out. This makes me, a salted fish who just wants to lie flat, very uncomfortable. I decided to have a talk with her. That day, when she came home from work, I invited her to sit on the sofa and even poured her a glass of water. "Honey, want to chat?" She sat down and looked at me. "I know you have a bad impression of me. You think I'm unmotivated, lazy, and spend way too much money." She didn't say a word. I spread my hands. But this is the real me. I used to live too hard, and now I just want to live a different way. "So you're helping me, really just for the allowance?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Of course, there's also a tiny bit because we're married, and I can't stand by and watch you go bankrupt. If you go bankrupt, I'll be out in the cold too." I looked into her eyes and said sincerely, "I assure you, I have no interest whatsoever in your company or your assets. I just want to be a qualified slacker." The living room was silent for a long time. She lowered her head, lost in thought. After a while, she looked up with a complicated expression. "Kyson, what if I told you that the you in my memory is different from this?" "The me in your memory?" She paused. "That you, was ambitious and calculating. He used me, used the Sterling Group, and ultimately allied with outsiders to destroy everything we had." Her voice was soft, but laced with a bone-deep hatred. I sighed inwardly. That me from the parallel timeline was truly a scumbag. I shook my head. That definitely wasn't me. If I were that kind of person, I would have teamed up with Kenneth last time. "Why would I help you?" "Yeah, why would you?" she murmured. I chuckled. Maybe this version of Kaisen is running on slacker mode, not villain mode. Slacker mode? Yeah, the ultimate goal in this mode is to coast through life, eat and sleep, and enjoy it. Any tasks related to hard work, effort, or scheming, I automatically ignore. She looked at me, the corner of her mouth twitching. It almost seemed like she was about to laugh. I thought life would just go on like this, plain and uneventful. Until that day, I received a phone call. It was from my mom. Kaisen, when are you and Bryn coming back for a visit? Your dad talks about you every day. Only then did I realize that it had been so long since we got our marriage certificate, and I still hadn't taken Bryn home. In my past life, my mom had also made this call. Back then, I was in a quarrel with Bryn and made up some excuse to brush it off. Later, I got busy with starting my business and went home less and less often, which became a lifelong regret. In this life, I don't want to leave any regrets behind. Mom, I'll be back this weekend. After hanging up, I went to find Bryn. She was in the study reviewing documents. Honey, how about coming home with me this weekend to meet my parents? She looked up but didn't answer right away. If it's not convenient for you, forget it. Okay. I was stunned. Huh? I said okay. She lowered her head to continue reading the documents, but the tips of her ears quietly turned red. You arranged the time. I walked out of the study in a daze. She actually agreed. That easily. On the weekend, I drove the most inconspicuous black car and took Bryn home. My home is in the old town, on the 6th floor with no elevator. Bryn, wearing high heels, was a bit unsteady climbing the stairs. I instinctively reached out to help, then pulled my hand back. She noticed my movement, her eyes flickered, but she said nothing and silently held on to the handrail. My mom was already waiting at the door. As soon as it opened, she took Bryn's hand, looked her up and down, and couldn't stop smiling. Oh my, so this is Bryn. She's really beautiful. Bryn was a bit stiffened by the scene but still politely said, "Hello, Auntie." Good, good, good. Come on in. My dad was sitting on the sofa, adjusted his glasses, and nodded at us. My mom had made a huge table of dishes, filling the small dining table to the brim. Bryn, eat more, see if it suits your taste. She kept piling food onto Bryn's bowl, and soon it was overflowing. Bryn looked at the food in her bowl, a bit at a loss, but still ate it earnestly, one small bite at a time. Auntie, it's delicious. My mom was even happier and added another large piece of braised pork. Seeing Bryn's troubled expression, I quickly came to her rescue. Mom, stop adding more. She can't eat that much. As I spoke, I naturally picked the braised pork from her bowl and put it into mine. This piece is too fatty, she doesn't like it. I'll take care of it for her. The atmosphere at the table instantly froze. My dad and mom stared at me with wide eyes. Bryn was also stunned. Only then did I realize, this gesture was far too natural, completely unlike something a contractual couple would do. I was about to explain. Yeah, I don't like fatty meat. Bryn lowered her head and continued eating. My mom immediately caught on. Oh, next time I'll make you the lean kind. I stole a glance at her, and the tips of her ears were red again. After dinner, my mom pulled Bryn over to look at the photo album. It was filled with pictures of me from childhood to adulthood, grinning goofily in diapers, receiving an award as a model student, and wearing a graduation gown at university. This is Kaisen when he was little, such a wild child, always out and about all day long, my mom said, pointing at a photo with a laugh. Bryn looked at it, a faint smile curling at the corners of her mouth. She spotted a photo of me at 7 or 8 years old with a band-aid on my nose and asked, what happened there? Oh, he fell out of a tree back then trying to rescue a cat that was stuck up there, my mom jumped in to answer. Bryn gazed at the me in the photo, a hint of tenderness flickering in her eyes. By the time we left my place, it was already dark. My mom insisted on giving her a big red envelope, and after some polite refusal, she accepted it. The road back was very quiet. You saved a cat when you were little, she suddenly asked. Huh? Yeah. I saw the cat meowing pitifully in the tree, and on a whim, I climbed up. And then? I took it home and raised it for several years. She fell silent. After a moment, she took a red envelope from her bag and handed it to me. Take this. This is from my mom for you. I know. But it's a gesture from your parents, I can't accept it. I looked at her, feeling a bit uneasy. I pulled the car over to the side of the road, looked at her seriously, and said, Bryn. Thank you for today. For what? Thank you for being willing to play along in this act with me, to put my parents' minds at ease. She shook her head. I'm not acting. She looked out the window and said softly, your parents are really good people. They remind me of my grandfather. It's been a long time, since I've felt this kind of family warmth. There was a hint of vulnerability in her voice. My heart softened, and without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand over hers, which was resting on the seat. Her hand was very cold. She stiffened and tried to pull it back, but I gently held on. From now on, my parents are your parents. And this place is your home too. I looked into her eyes and said it seriously. She stopped struggling and just gazed at me quietly, her eyes gradually turning red. Outside the car window, the city's neon lights flickered, reflecting in her beautiful eyes. At that moment, the invisible wall between us cracked open. After returning from our hometown, Bryn and I grew much closer. We moved in together, and I officially moved from the guest room into the master bedroom. She was no longer the cold, icy CEO, and I was no longer the lazy bum who only knew how to spend money. I wake up earlier than her in the morning and make a simple breakfast. Though the taste varies, she always finishes it without any expression and gives a brief comment, not bad. During the day, she goes to work while I stay home petting the cat, playing games, and experimenting with recipes. Occasionally, she texts asking, "What did you have for lunch?" I send her a photo of takeout, and half an hour later, a 5-star hotel lunch arrives at the door. In the evening, she tries to come home early, and we curl up on the sofa watching movies, with the orange tabby cat purring on our laps. Life is ordinary, but happy. I thought this would be how the rest of my life went. Until that night. I got up to drink water and passed by her room, only to find the door slightly ajar. Muffled sobbing came from inside. My heart tightened as I pushed the door open. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees, her body trembling uncontrollably. Under the moonlight, her face was streaked with tears. What's wrong? I walked over and crouched in front of her. She looked up and saw me, and her tears flowed even more fiercely. She threw herself into my arms, holding me tightly. Kyson. I had a nightmare. I dreamed about my past life. I dreamed of you, you jumped from the rooftop, you were covered in blood, and you said to me, Bryn, if there's a next life, I never want to meet you again. I shuddered all over. The ending of that, me, was jumping off a building to commit suicide. She cried heart-wrenchingly in my arms, telling me, in fragments, the future that belonged to her. In her world, Kyson, that me, also came from an ordinary background, and also entered into a business marriage with her. But that, I did not give up. Ambitious and driven, he climbed the ranks step by step after joining Sterling Group, quickly seizing control of the company. He became cold, autocratic, and pushed out those who opposed him. She and he fought tooth and nail within the company. I thought everything he did was to take over Sterling Group. I hated him, I guarded against him. Her voice was hoarse. Until that day, Sterling Group's biggest rival, backed by overseas capital, launched a hostile takeover. Everyone thought we were finished. It was at that moment that he stepped forward. Her body began to tremble again. He mobilized all the assets he had secretly invested over the years, set up a fund, and bought back shares at any cost. He single-handedly saved the entire Sterling Group. But, he signed a gambling agreement. He saved the Sterling Group, but ended up bankrupt himself, burdened with astronomical debts. I went to find him, wanting to tell him that the Sterling Group's money was his money, and that we would face it together. But he refused to see me. Then I received the news that he had jumped from the top floor of the company building. She couldn't go on any longer. I finally understood. What she hated was the Kaisen who had hurt her and her family. But what she couldn't forget was the Kaisen who had ultimately protected her with his life. These two contradictory images tore at her memory for a long time. And my appearance, a completely different person, plunged her into even deeper confusion. Why did he do that? I asked softly. She shook her head. He didn't say anything. His last words were, "I never want to meet you again in the next life." I fell silent. I could probably guess what that me was thinking. He was too proud. He loved her in his own way, but he didn't want her to see him in his failure. So he chose the most tragic way to end it. He didn't know how deep the pain he left behind for the living was. Bryn, I cupped her face and wiped away her tears. Look at me. She looked at me through tear-filled eyes. I'm not him. I'm not the Kaisen in your memories. My name is Kaisen, but I come from another world. In my world, I exhausted myself to death trying to catch up with you. Fate has given me a second chance, and I just want to live well, for you, and for myself. She stared at me blankly. This time, she didn't doubt me anymore. Perhaps it was the overwhelming emotions of the night, or maybe my persistent actions had finally made her let down her guard. She nodded. Then, she kissed me first. It was a cold kiss, tinged with the saltiness of tears. But soon, it turned passionate. When I woke up the next morning, the spot beside me was empty, but her warmth and scent still lingered. I stared at the ceiling, feeling dazed. Were she and I, together now? Going downstairs, Bryn was sitting at the dining table, dressed in loungewear, her long hair loose, without her usual coldness. When she saw me, her cheeks flushed slightly, and she turned her head away. Morning. Morning. The atmosphere was a bit awkward. I scratched my head. Kaisen, she spoke first, last night. I don't know anything about last night. I drank too much and blacked out. She paused for a moment, then a beautiful curve lifted the corners of her mouth. Me too. We smiled at each other. After that day, our relationship completely changed. She was no longer the aloof, untouchable CEO, and I was no longer the lazy, good-for-nothing live-in son-in-law. We were just an ordinary couple. Until that day, she suddenly said, "This weekend, come with me to meet someone." Who? You'll know when we get there. On the weekend, she took me to a place. It wasn't some fancy restaurant or a romantic spot. Instead, it was an aerospace science museum. In the vast exhibition hall, various rocket models and spacecraft were on display. Why did you bring me here? I asked, puzzled. She looked at me. Isn't this what you've loved since you were a kid? You wrote it in your college notebook, you wanted to build rockets and go to space. I was stunned. That was my notebook. When did she see it? Did your mom give it to you? I realized. Yeah. She took a document out of her bag and handed it to me. A birthday gift. I opened it, and my pupils suddenly contracted. At the top of the document was written, Starlight Aerospace Technology Company, Limited, and in the legal representative column was my name. You acquired an aerospace company? Yes, she said. Among the qualified private enterprises in the country, I acquired one and assembled a technical team. Funding, talent, and qualifications, everything is ready. Now, it only lacks a CEO. She looked into my eyes, brighter than the stars. Kaisen, go do what you want to do. Don't suppress your dreams for me. Your journey should be among the stars and the sea. I looked at this birthday gift, then at the woman before me, and my eyes welled up. I had always thought I was the one protecting her. It turns out, she had been protecting me in her own way all along. I held her tightly. Bryn, you really were sent by heaven to keep me in check. She chuckled softly in my arms. Right back at you. 1 year later. Stellar Aerospace successfully launched its first commercial rocket. At the celebration banquet, I was surrounded by a crowd of reporters. Mr. Kyson, may I ask what was your original intention when you founded Star Aerospace? I picked up the microphone and glanced at the woman below the stage, who was smiling at me. I chuckled. The intention was simple. I just wanted to prove that I can afford to support my wife. The entire audience burst into laughter. Bryn, below the stage, quietly took out her phone amidst the laughter and sent a message to her hacker friend. Help me check if parallel universe travel could possibly be bidirectional. She put away her phone, watching me on stage, full of vigor and confidence, a meaningful smile curling at the corner of her lips. Perhaps her Kyson had never died. He had simply come to her side in another way. And she, too, was the same.